Thank you, Anand, for having me here. It's really a pleasure to get to read this book ahead of time and to get it free. So one doesn't mind staying up at night and reading it. So though it was last minute, I enjoyed reading it. What I've done is I have kind of listed my notes, so I'll read through. As I said, I enjoyed reading it, and Arundhati writes so well that you always think that you can improve your writing the way you write when you read it. So that was the first thing that comes to your mind when you are reading it. So about the book and the introduction to it that Arundhati writes, which is a very detailed one and a very exciting one to read. So this book is timely. Actually, it has arrived late, but any change around caste takes rather too long in our great Indian civilization. So this is a welcome addition around Ambedkar and Annihilation of Caste. I prefer to call Annihilation of Caste as the only modern seminal text produced by a highly educated and scholarly Hindu in colonial India. So that's the central idea. Anything radical came up in colonial India which questions the fundamentals of the morals which are problematic in Indian society. It is Annihilation of Caste. And ignoring it is at the peril of Hindus, as Ambedkar himself has pointed out what his attempt was. I think this is a first where a famous, but not mainstream, given the fact that you also have sedition charge against you, you are not definitely famous or popular. So, a famous author of Indian descent has taken some time to think on the moral corruption of caste that governs the Indian conscience, Mahatma included. And for a change, the path taken is Ambedkar. The power of annihilation of caste is not new for Dalits. The reverence that caste Hindus might have for Bhagavad Gita, though contrary, Ambedkarite Dalits carry a similar devotion for annihilation of caste. However, the normality of caste purity that constructs the life worlds of the privileged Hindus, Muslims, Christians, as privileged caste Hindus, Muslims, Christians, makes the idea of annihilation abnormal and a Dalit burden. So that's the problem we are facing in Dalit times. There is a talk about this book, there is a talk amongst few Dalits therefore, on whether Arundhati and Anand should indulge in this exercise at all. I fear that by doing this, we will be throwing both the privileged caste and their suppressed humanism out of Ambedkarite praxis. Though long driven, caste sickness can be cured and we should not lose hope. On a lighter note, but technically sound in a Hindu way, I think Arundhati is not a pure caste. Born out of miscegenation to a Brahmo and a Syrian Christian woman, she cannot be. Such sexual mess-ups theoretically result in birth of Chandalas and untouchables. So there's very little need for her to run for cover. This of course leaves out Anand. To those who are well versed with any South Indian village, Anand may seem like a restless priest of a small village temple. But I call him the greatest Brahmin betrayal of this century. He is an outcast for most of the traditional and modern Brahmins who might have read him. I have arrived at this through reading the comments for all that Anand has written so far. He may well be the most abused Brahmin of present times, online. And given the fact that the pace at which Dalit political leaders who get trained in Ambedkarism and leave Ambedkarite politics to join BJP, present examples are Udit Raj, Athole, Ramvilas Paswan. Outcast privileged castes are welcome. I mean, these are exceptions. We better take them in instead of sending them out. However, without investing much time on this issue, I will move on to Arundhati's introduction to Annihilation of Caste. I will call it AOC here onwards. This introduction is a brilliant introductory text for those Indians who have not read Ambedkar for caste reasons. I mean that your caste has obstructed it from reading. You obstructed you from reading Ambedkar. So this is a very brilliant text for introduction. Like Arundhati writes in the introduction, and Ambedkar insisted long back in Annihilation of Caste, caste ideology and practice is a sign of intolerance, inequality and social hierarchy. Why then does caste continue to thrive as a socio-political, ritual and economic practice? The answers are there in AOC and also in Arundhati's essay. Arundhati has tried to historicize and contemporize AOC. I think the fundamentals lay in the popular understanding of caste not being a disease, not even parts of it. It is rather a moral practice. Caste, no doubt, makes India's democracy both vibrant and indigenous. So what I have done is I have tried to just briefly, I'll talk about the history bits of the book. I am not going to go in details. And the present, because as a sociologist I am more concerned about the present, so maybe I'll just briefly engage with that. Arundhati does well to point out the moral control of caste on the privileged, and Ambedkar's struggle to liberate the untouchables, and the tyranny of the privileged from caste, ignorance, and arrogance. That is, the privileged themselves are kind of victimized because of this ignorance and arrogance. Gandhi serves a critical case to help us better understand the problems with Hindu morality. In an international context, given that the borders are blurred, transition or movement from between states is very common for privileged Hindus, I think interrogating Gandhi both in and outside India, South Africa, is very important because that kind of sets tone for understanding what happens to caste privilege when it moves around the world. So you have elements of getting at the fundamentals here very much. So Gandhi serves as a critical case to help us better understand the problems with Hindu morality, his politics, morals, experiments, and the movement from truth to truth. I think there is, the book is laced with sarcasm, so you just have to read and enjoy it in Gandhi. So this movement from truth to truth, despite modern education, was less puzzling and more disturbing for Ambedkar. Because through AOC, Ambedkar kind of opens this up for interrogation. So he's bringing the fundamentals and the actual workings of caste. So he's not puzzled, so he's just by Gandhi's behavior. The details of South African experience, therefore, does well to expose the cunning nature of Gandhi's politics. I will not go into the details, but it has very interesting elements of how Gandhi moves in between various political positions to differentiate Indians as a race who are closer to the British whites and who are much higher than the Kafirs and the local blacks there. Gandhi's views on race presaged his views on caste, you suggest. I thought this could also be other way around. Maybe you would like to throw some light on this when we talk. I thought also the present times could have been covered better. And Ambedkar is a very, though you said it very well, the way Ambedkar has been ignored. So to move on, Arundhati writes, devolution comes through reading. Gandhi is the best example of how this idea does not work in India. We read but do not understand. We listen but do not follow. We see but it does not affect us. That is and this is to do with the morality of caste. You know, that's how it is, and that's what Ambedkar is engaging with in AOC. It takes an Amir Khan to get us to see a TV serial on social issues. See. And an Arundhati to sell Ambedkar. Sell in a good way. Everything has to be sold. You know, we buy pens, we buy papers. So if you have to sell Ambedkar, it's all good. Money is not always bad. This is most important. There are some real good parts. Real good parts on violence against Dalits. Real good parts on how the present capitalist organization of India can actually be well disaggregated on basis of caste. Interesting figures also you give. You may come under criticism from some economists because they engage in figures better than all of us. Because you cite Pushpan Singh somewhere, so maybe, of course you say there is no data on how these aspects, but maybe authentic sources is, anyway, people will, scholars will point that out. I appreciate the passion throughout. The present picture is, however, I thought throughout, though Gandhi is critical and very important to understand, the present, I don't know why this is running away from me. Just hold on. Okay. Right. I thought the present picture could have been more nuanced. For instance, violence against Dalits is a very important aspect to talk of the violence of caste. But the violence of caste, how it percolates into violence against women in privileged castes. So this is a very understudied subject, especially amongst the dominant castes. And that comes all those Marathas, Jats, and so on and so forth. So violence against caste Hindu women in rural areas is something that is well hidden, not documented, and not reported. And that, I think, is more troubling than, because Dalits are fighting, privileged caste women cannot fight, and the gender elements could have been more engaging. Despite enjoying it so much, there are some elements which I'm talking about your essay and the discussion on AOC. You can link this when we respond on how it's linked to AOC. But I thought at times there is this presentation of present picture as very bleak, very troubling. The possibilities of change are less. So, for instance, though the violence is there against Dalits, the rate of conviction in SC/ST Atrocity Act was much higher and better in UP when Mayawati was in power. So this possibilities of turning it around, where are they and how people are engaging could have been brought out much better, I thought. So democracy is working in certain forms that could have been out there. It works for marginals when they claim and assert. You kind of reconstruct Varna in absolute terms for present times. Brahmins control bureaucracy, media, along with Banya owners. Banyas do capital or capitalism. Shudras control the lower floor of this whole building and keep everyone out. This can be problematic. The critique of Brahmanism is important and it's very much part of the society. But this kind of becomes anti-Brahmin, anti-Banya. What you mentioned in passing that there are some dominant castes who have broken into control of media, but that's in passing. And that, because what I feel is, if you look at the rural economy, the peasant capitalists are really dominant and they decide on how both the upper and the lower caste will function and how caste will work in the rural spaces. There is also a little distinction about, it could have been mentioned again in passing, that cities and villages, caste is different. In cities, there is at least this invisibility attached to your identity. So, but in villages, it's absolute. There is no scope for maneuvering. Therefore, the conflict is quite upfront, which is not in cities. In cities, it's complex. Maybe if you would have linked this to AOC, because Ambedkar kind of brings out the fundamental moral problems with the text and how you end up ingrained and practice this text of all the scriptures and practice of caste. So if this could have brought out in the context of cities, there is enough material. If you just look at these Marathi newspapers, the way they write in very polite Marathi that SC/STs are not in matrimonials, except SC/ST everyone is fine. So these are the practices. How the modern Hindu can also be this, that's the problem. So in present times, most violence against Dalits is carried out by dominant warrior castes. In my own study, I found that 45% of the violent cases of violence against Dalits were done by Kunbi Marathas. Now this is a huge number of cases. If one was to follow a colonial notion of allotting criminal status to castes and tribes, some castes can be declared as criminal, because of this continuous engagement in violence. So Marathas, Kunbis in Maharashtra, Jats in Haryana, Dondar, Thevar, Baniyar, Reddy, Kama, Vakaliga, Lingayat, Patel, Yadav, Ranvi now. This points to a new dynamics of power. The fact that Modi is a Teli, the language is anti-caste, but radically Hindu also. So this is very new and very working. So maybe this could be explained when we discuss. So we are in a difficult situation of dominant caste practicing Brahmanism radically, a gruesome combination of atrocious patriarchy locally within their households, coupled with violent social distance with Dalits and other non-pure castes. I have never worked in an NGO, though TISS generally gets attached, Tata Institute they say. But I also thought that, though you mentioned that NGOs may help Dalits in certain way, mobility and all, I think you all only brought this scholar called, I must tell you all that, this is a very scholarly set of writing that Arundhati has done. So this is not just general ranting that activists do. So she's based it on exhaustive references and all. But in this case, I thought you quote only Anand Teltumde. So he just feeds into your case. You know, there are others, including me, who have argued against, given a nuanced picture. Maybe that would be better. You do a good job, and I think this is where I can be in trouble. You do a very good job exposing Ambedkar's problematic attribution of primitivity to tribes and obvious problems with it. But the appreciation of Maoist is kind of blind to the caste question there. Those who fight within these struggles are tribes, and those who lead are not. I am also not sure if we can homogenize all Adivasis and their aspirations as one linked to forest and protection of forests. When most forests have been grabbed in present times, and also the mode of violence, I am no Gandhian, but this engagement with paying through gun to the state and to those involved, because state is also very amorphous, and various groups have stakes in the state, including the Adivasis. So against this violence of this scale, are democratic means possible? What do you think of tribal political leaders in central India? Are any of them good enough to make democracy work for them? I also felt that some space, see, the introduction is important. Annihilation of caste is there, and Anand does a very good job of providing annotations and details to that. I mean, one should not run away from the fact that Anand is doing and Arundhati are engaged in getting a text out which generally would not be read by privileged castes, and also has a lot of details about Gandhi, as I said, who serves a critical case to expose the elements of this problems with this morality. So it's very much there. So I'm not really going to talk about AOC, as you said, but it's very essential, therefore, you bring in Gandhi. But I thought some space could have been also, in passing, for Gandhi could have been reduced somewhere, and you could have also engaged with the repulsion of Hindus to Muslims, and I think this is linked to caste morality, you know, in present times. So, and because even Ambedkar points out to this while writing about the Hindu-Muslim relation and how Hindus react to Muslims. Finally, two suggestions. I am no one to suggest much to you, but generally, as a Dalit who has spent considerable time in village, the first paper I wrote in EPW, I don't know how I ended up with poor editors. They edited it again, did a very poor job, the EPW. But it was about what I faced in the village and how I dealt with it and so on. So there may be some passion in what I am saying. But, so not sure how much it will sell, but I think for Anand, it is important to make vernacular edition of the whole book possible. Okay. Marathi, Hindi is there. Yeah, that will be very great. Arundhati, I know you like to travel light, so once you are done with annihilation of caste, you may move on to writing something new and as political. You know, and you have made substantial contributions to general people's thinking. Whereas Dalits will continue to take their burden of AOC further. It's part of our lives. We have to do it. I have a suggestion as you move on, if you move on. You might want to change your Brahmo surname that you got from your Brahmin father. You may want to convert to Ambedkar's Buddhism. Notional, but just notionally, do it. It's merely about principles, as you write in the text. And finally, join some Dalit political party. Any that you think is non-corrupt and promises change in the long run. All your friends, this Mela Patkar, I think you work with her for a time. She's with AAP now. No. But see, this faith in working on politics, including Anna Hazare, is kind of problematic for me of the caste consciousness. If caste has to work, you have to have a very strong belief in democracy. But if you have to challenge caste, even then you have to have a strong belief in democracy. That's what I derived from Ambedkar. Democracy. Yeah, and workings of party politics. And unfortunately, democracy in India is reduced to the working of party politics. Much change in India is through compulsion, and which is generated through party politics. So this is about the text, the main introduction, which is substantial and very important. The annotations, I mean, one could substantially enjoy them because it gives, as I said, for instance, about Santram, what Anand was mentioning. Now, and who is part of Jatpat Todak Mandal, who calls Ambedkar to give this talk. Very interestingly, he, and Anand mentions it, that he uses his surname as BSc, so BA, sorry, okay, yes, Santram as, I don't know why I written BSc. There are others who use this, okay, right, so, and he's not a Brahmin, and there are others who change their surnames. I don't know whether some of you may have read this, but there was recently a case in Bihar where a lawyer who is from Ranbir caste sued his son for marrying a Kurmi, and the case was about the son should be dropping the surname Sharma because he is married a lower caste. Now, and our courts function very interestingly. They have admitted that case. I don't understand what kind of logic this is. So the dynamism of modernity and legalism is very interesting. It can accommodate everything in India. So you do well to point out several things here in the annotations and the associated struggles to and the problematic context that Ambedkar is engaging with. I really like, for instance, this note that you mentioned on why not Sikhism. It's generally not part of this course, but you cite the scholars saying that the Jats were scared that if so many Dalits join Sikhism, the Jats will be of no relevance. So that's very interesting. I think the elements of Dewey's contribution and so on. I thought the parts on eugenics and on the race element, eugenics and how I thought that page 240, I don't have the text, but what Ambedkar is, I think, trying to say is, because some of the, and this is also in Arundhati's introduction, she engages with some of our great indigenous feminist scholars like Madhu Kishwar, who say that caste is very important in making our society work right now. So I am really glad that you, I would have appreciated if you would have maybe given one page to demolishing these guys further, but yeah, these scholars are really troubling because I don't know what kind of education and what kind of morals they carry. It's troublesome. So I thought what Ambedkar was doing here is also if you see, he says if, so there is this caste group which is saying caste is part of having racial purity so that you are martially great. You can be, you can prevent that purity to be a certain kind of race. Now he's saying if you think caste is this, then you are not really succeeded in achieving those kind of high, you are just a C3 kind of species. But this is just in passing. Maybe again, as I said, my blind eye being a passionate scholar, we can just talk about it later also. But what I thought was that the annotations are so rich that you enjoy reading the annihilation of caste further because of this, because it's a parallel paper with really detailed background of the scholars Ambedkar is influenced with the kind of people who are trying to obstruct or are trying to help Ambedkar and so on. So it makes a very interesting reading. I think you need to make this fresh, and that is what the book has done. So because it's very relevant, and you are taking it to a new audience, which is very important. So I think I'll stop here and we can.
Thank you, Suryakant, for what I felt was a very useful response. I mean, we need to think about these issues that you have flagged. And as for Roy dropping her surname, and I mean, this bit about Santram is very, very interesting. So he's born into a potter caste. One of the things that, because it is to Santram also that we owe this text in many ways. So for me, one of the first searches, it took me 6 to 8 months to write that footnote because this information is not available on Google. You cannot just say who is Santram and find an answer. It's not in Wikipedia. There's lots of stuff here which you need to kind of meet people, translate texts, my Hindi improved in the whole process of doing this, and Ajay Navaria, my Hindi has improved. Because you have to read original text, and I had good help with Yuli Perzel doing this. But Sant Ram drops his caste name and adopts BA, the education. You know, I mean, what Ambedkar is talking about, educate, organize, agitate. I mean, that is symbolized by Sant Ram and his partners there, some of whom Harbhagwan. And it's so ironic that because of the surname thing, I'm speaking a bit about it. Harbhagwan was an associate of Sant Ram, who was not as strong-hearted as Sant Ram was in defending Ambedkar and continuing to correspond with Ambedkar. Ambedkar goes on to write preface for Sant Ram's book. This was told to me by Bhagwan Das, and without Bhagwan Das, I wouldn't have really gone as deep into this as I could, because he was an inspiration for me. And Bhagwan Das used to tell me, I mean, in his writing there was so much about those times, because he was somebody who met Ambedkar, and I could sit with Bhagwan Das and talk about it. That was my pleasure and privilege. So you could find out that this Harbhagwan was actually a Sethi. In 1972, he writes in a journal called The Atheist, which is published from Vijayawada by the Atheist Center. And then they inform us very gently that he's actually a Sethi. Till then, there's no record of the fact that Harbhagwan was a Sethi. So the way the thing comes back, when the atheists want to publish a note by Harbhagwan. So this is there, and another question posed to you was of, can you be an Ambedkarite Maoist? Can you be an Ambedkarite Maoist? Is it because this, for Ambedkar, as she said in the earlier part of her speech, it's a society, and today she was talking about how society is the first curb against free speech, and Dalits have the best experience of this. Dalits have the worst experience of this in some ways, in terms of seeing society as the, and Ambedkar has a very theoretically strong position on how society is the real enemy more than the state. Whereas for the Maoists, it's the other way around. They're not addressing society's inequalities as much as that imposed by the state. So that's, as he said, you know, there's so much of it, the Teltumde line. But in Suryakant's response, I found Teltumde's line as well, where he talks with, so wants us to emphasize more on the middle caste violence on Dalits, which is what Teltumde has been arguing since, especially after the 70s Green Revolution. He says this is what has been happening. So over to Roy for her response.
Well, I think I've spoken in this hall about this subject before. See, one of the things that I think we should think about is that what has happened to radical politics today. You know, and when you look at movements like the Narmada movement or the Maoist movement or all the militant movements that exist today in Orissa, Jharkhand, I'm not just talking about the Maoists, but the Maoists are the militant end and the Gandhians are the other end and all of that. But think back to the 1960s, at the time when whether it was the Naxalites or whether it was JP or whoever it was, what they were talking about was equality, was land to the tiller. Today, the only thing they're talking about is whatever we have left with us, at least let us keep. And they've been pushed, the radical movements have been pushed to the wall, you know, and so even they are only talking about allowing those who have land to retain the land, which is Adivasi people in the forests, in the mountains. They've all been pushed back. The radical movements are not talking about the landless, and Dalits are predominantly a landless people. So they are left out of that equation altogether. But I think, you know, having been pushed back into the forests from even the plains where they did exist in the 70s and 80s, even the Maoists and earlier communist parties have tried at some point, you know, to do things like seize land and redistribute it, but they've never been. The minute it becomes